The smell of old paper and wood polish had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. But tonight it clung to my clothes like a second skin as I rushed through the closing routine at Ashford City Library. My fingers fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice on the circulation desk before I finally managed to lock the main doors. The ancient grandfather clock in the reference section chimed 8 times, each gong a reminder that I was already running late. I'd told my sister Charlotte this was a terrible idea. Blind dates were for people who had time for romance, who didn't spend their evenings cataloging dusty first editions and dreaming of one day owning a bookshop that smelled of leather bindings and possibility. But Charlotte had been insistent, practically begging me to meet this mystery man she swore would be perfect for me. She described him as successful, well-mannered, and surprisingly patient. I'd laughed and told her those 3 qualities rarely existed in the same person. But she'd already given him my description. The red silk blouse she'd bought me for my birthday. The one I'd protested was too bold for someone like me. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and my practical flats clicked against the wet pavement as I half walked, half jogged through the September drizzle. The weather had turned suddenly, as it often did in Ashford, catching the city between seasons. My cotton jacket offered little protection, and I could feel dampness seeping through to my shoulders. I rounded the corner just in time to see the taillights of the number 17 bus pulling away from the curb, its red glow mocking me through the rain. A string of very unladylike words escaped my lips, the kind that would have scandalized the elderly patrons who frequented the library. I stood there, water dripping from my hair, staring at my phone as I calculated the timeline. The next bus wouldn't arrive for 45 minutes. Even if I caught it, I'd be over an hour late to the restaurant. What kind of man would wait that long? Certainly not the successful, well-mannered type Charlotte had described. He'd probably already left, assuming I'd stood him up. I should have called a taxi. I should have left work earlier. I should have told Charlotte no in the first place. But standing there in my increasingly soaked red blouse, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe the universe was telling me I wasn't ready for this, that my dreams of antiquarian bookshops and quiet evenings with rare manuscripts were enough. I didn't need romance. I didn't need complications. My phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "He's there. Says he'll wait. Please don't bail on me, Vi. You promised." I sighed, watching rain create small rivers along the gutters. The restaurant was only about 2 miles away. In different shoes, on a dry night, it might have been a pleasant walk. Tonight, it would be an ordeal. But I'd promised my sister, and Charlotte had done so much for me over the years, especially after Dad died, and left us scrambling to hold things together. The least I could do was show up, apologize profusely to this poor man, and endure whatever awkward dinner conversation followed. I started walking, my supposedly waterproof jacket proving to be anything but. Within 5 minutes, I was thoroughly soaked. Within 10, my right heel caught in a sidewalk crack and snapped clean off, leaving me limping like some bedraggled Cinderella who'd lost her slipper on the way to the ball. I held the broken piece of shoe in my hand, staring at it in disbelief, before laughing at the absurdity of it all. Of course this would happen tonight. The rain intensified, fat drops that seemed determined to wash away any remaining dignity I possessed. I hobbled along, now carrying both shoes in one hand while my purse dangled from my shoulder, soaking through to the library books I'd borrowed for research on Victorian bindings. Cars passed, their headlights cutting through the downpour, and I imagined how I must look to their occupants. A drowned rat in a red blouse, limping barefoot through the streets like someone who'd lost a fight with reality. My phone buzzed again. "Charlotte, are you close?" He texted me asking if you're okay. He seems worried. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. Worried about a woman he'd never met, who was now 40 minutes late to their date. Either this man was a saint, or he was desperate. Neither option particularly appealed to me. I typed back quickly, my fingers slipping on the wet screen. Missed the bus. Walking. Be there soon. Tell him he should go. The response came immediately. He says he'll wait. Something about those 3 words made my chest tighten. In all my 24 years, I couldn't remember the last time someone had waited for me. Dad had died when I was 19, leaving Charlotte and me to navigate adulthood without his steady guidance. Mom had remarried within a year and moved to Florida, more interested in her new life than in maintaining connections with her daughters. Friends from college had drifted away, caught up in careers and relationships that left little room for a bookish girl who preferred fictional heroes to real ones. But this stranger, this man I'd never met, was willing to wait in a restaurant while I trudged through a rainstorm like some tragic character from a 19th century novel. It was ridiculous. It was touching. It was probably motivated by politeness rather than genuine interest. Yet something about it made me walk faster, ignoring the ache in my feet and the cold seeping into my bones. The restaurant, Il Primo, finally came into view, its warm golden light spilling onto the wet sidewalk like a promise of shelter. I paused at the corner, taking in my reflection in a darkened shop window. My hair hung in wet tangles around my face. My red blouse clung to me in ways that would have been scandalous if it weren't so pathetic. Mascara that I'd applied carefully before leaving the library now created dark smudges beneath my eyes. I looked like I'd been through a war, and in a way, I had. I couldn't go in there. I couldn't subject some poor man to this disaster of a first impression. But before I could turn away and retreat to my small apartment where dry clothes and hot tea awaited, the restaurant door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered in a dark suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He stood under the awning, seemingly unbothered by the rain that had driven everyone else inside, and pulled out his phone. I should have kept walking, should have hidden in the shadows until he went back inside. But something made me stay, watching as he typed something on his phone. A moment later, my phone buzzed. Charlotte. He's leaving. Said he waited as long as he could. I'm so sorry, Vi. The man pocketed his phone and turned toward the street, presumably looking for his car. That's when he saw me. Even from half a block away, I felt the weight of his gaze, felt it travel from my bare feet to my bedraggled hair, to the broken shoe still clutched in my hand. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the rain-soaked distance. Then something happened to his face. His expression shifted from polite disinterest to something I couldn't quite name. Recognition? Surprise? Amusement? He started walking toward me with purposeful strides that ate up the distance between us. I stood frozen, suddenly aware of how I must look, of the spectacle I'd become. When he was close enough that I could see the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, close enough that I could see eyes the color of storm clouds, he stopped. Red blouse, he said, his voice deep and controlled, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe, or something that had been softened by years in America. Charlotte's sister. Violet. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway, clutching my broken shoe like it might somehow protect me from his scrutiny. Up close, he was even more intimidating than from a distance. Not because he was threatening, but because he was so utterly, perfectly composed. His suit probably hadn't started the evening pristine, but it looked that way now. His hair was styled back from his face, not a strand out of place despite the rain. He looked like he'd stepped from an advertisement for expensive watches or luxury cars, and I looked like I'd been fished from a river. I'm so sorry, I began, the words tumbling out in a rush. I missed my bus, and then it started raining, and my shoe broke, and I know I'm over an hour late, and you probably have better things to do than wait for some stranger who can't even manage to arrive on time for a simple dinner. And you walked here, he interrupted, his eyes moving from my face to my bare feet and back again. In this weather. Without shoes. Technically, I had shoes when I started, I said, holding up the broken heel as evidence. But apparently they weren't built for crisis situations. Really, I understand if you want to leave. Charlotte shouldn't have pressured you into this. I told her blind dates were a terrible idea, but she insisted, and I'm clearly a disaster. So, "You're shivering," he observed, cutting off my rambling again. He shrugged out of his suit jacket, and I found myself staring at the way his white shirt clung to shoulders that suggested he spent time doing something more physical than sitting behind a desk. Before I could protest, he draped the jacket around my shoulders. It was still warm from his body, and smelled of something expensive and masculine. Cedar, maybe, with notes of something darker that I couldn't identify. "I can't take your jacket," I protested weakly, even as I pulled it tighter around myself, grateful for the warmth. "You already have," he pointed out, a hint of amusement coloring his tone. "And you're going to keep it until we get you inside and dried off." "We're not going inside," I said, forcing myself to meet his eyes, despite wanting to disappear into the pavement. "Look at me. I can't walk into a nice restaurant looking like this. Everyone will stare." "Let them stare," he said simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world to ignore public opinion. "You walked 2 miles in a rainstorm to meet me. The least I can do is buy you dinner." "You don't owe me anything," I said, but my stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, betraying me. One corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "Your stomach disagrees. Come on, Violet. Let me at least get you warm and fed before you catch pneumonia." There was something about the way he said my name, with that slight accent wrapping around the syllables, that made something flutter in my chest. Or maybe it was just the cold. Or the absurdity of the situation. Or the fact that after an hour of waiting and watching me approach in the most undignified state imaginable, he was still standing here, offering me dinner instead of running for the safety of his undoubtedly expensive car. "I don't even know your name," I said, grasping at one last reason to refuse. "Weston," he replied, extending his hand formally despite the rain and my disheveled state. "Weston Ashford." I stared at his outstretched hand, then at his face, something clicking into place. Ashford. Like the library where I worked. Like half the buildings in this part of the city. Charlotte hadn't mentioned that small detail when she'd set up this date. I'd assumed her mysterious friend was just another successful businessman. I hadn't realized he was one of those Ashfords, the family that had helped build this city from the ground up generations ago. My hand moved automatically to shake his, and I felt calluses there that surprised me. Whatever he did with his time, it wasn't just signing papers and attending board meetings. His grip was firm but careful, as if he were aware of his own strength and consciously tempering it. "You're one of the Ashfords," I said stupidly, stating the obvious. "Guilty?" he said, still holding my hand. "Does that change your answer about dinner?" Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to use this revelation as an excuse to flee back to my comfortable, predictable life. But standing there in his jacket, with rain running down my face and his steady gaze fixed on mine, I found myself saying something entirely different. "I should probably warn you that I'm not very good at this," I said. "Dating, I mean. I'm much better with books than people. And I have a tendency to say awkward things when I'm nervous. And right now, I'm very nervous, so you should probably prepare yourself for me to say something mortifying at some point during dinner." That almost smile returned. "I'll take my chances." He guided me toward the restaurant with a hand at my elbow that was more supportive than proprietary, as if he understood I might bolt at any moment. Which I might have, if my feet weren't so cold and my stomach wasn't so empty, and if there wasn't something about the way he'd waited, the way he'd walked toward me instead of away, the way he was looking at me now, like I was something more than a waterlogged disaster in a red blouse. The maitre d's eyes widened when he saw us, taking in my bare feet and sodden appearance with barely concealed shock. But Weston simply said something in rapid Italian that I didn't catch. And suddenly we were being ushered not to the main dining room where I'd imagined enduring stares from other patrons, but to a private room with a fireplace already burning and only one table set for two. "Better?" Weston asked, helping me into a chair positioned near the fire. I wanted to make a joke about special treatment for the embarrassing dates, but the warmth from the flames was already seeping into my bones, and I couldn't quite form words around the relief of it. Instead, I nodded, pulling his jacket tighter around my shoulders, even though I knew I should give it back. A server appeared with what looked like heated towels and a first aid kit, both of which were placed discreetly on a side table before disappearing again. Weston gestured to them. "For your feet." I'm assuming the walk wasn't kind to them. I looked down at my feet, now resting on the plush carpet, and noticed for the first time the small cuts and bruises that decorated them. I'd been so focused on getting here, on not disappointing Charlotte, on not thinking about how cold and wet I was, that I hadn't registered the pain. Now, with safety and warmth surrounding me, I felt every scraped heel and stubbed toe. "I'm fine," I lied automatically. Weston raised one eyebrow, a gesture that somehow communicated both skepticism and patience. "Humor me." There was something about the way he said it, gentle but unyielding, that made me reach for the towels. As I cleaned my feet, wincing at the sting, I became aware of him moving around the room, his phone in his hand as he made a quiet call in Italian. I caught only fragments, but enough to understand he was arranging for something to be delivered. When he finished, he sat across from me, finally close enough that I could see details I'd missed on the street. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw was slightly off-center, as if it had been broken once and healed imperfectly. The calluses on his hands that spoke of work more physical than managing family businesses. And his eyes, which I'd thought were gray but were actually closer to blue, like the sky just before a storm. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for waiting, for not leaving when you had every reason to." "I told Charlotte I'd wait," he said simply. "I keep my promises. Even when they involve sitting alone in a restaurant for over an hour, even then." The next morning, I woke to find 3 missed calls from Charlotte, and a text message that simply read, "Call me immediately. Emergency girl talk required." I groaned, pulling my blanket over my head, as memories from the previous night flooded back. The dinner had lasted 3 hours. 3 hours during which I'd somehow managed to tell Weston Ashford about my dreams of owning an antiquarian bookshop, my tendency to arrange books by color when I was stressed, and my conviction that the best fictional love story ever written was in an obscure Victorian novel about star-crossed lighthouse keepers. He'd listened to all of it, asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. Even more surprisingly, I'd learned things about him. That he restored vintage motorcycles in his spare time, which explained the calluses. That he'd spent 2 years working construction in Italy before returning to Ashford to take over family obligations he'd never wanted. That he had a younger sister, Morgan, who'd apparently masterminded this blind date along with Charlotte behind his back. "They've been friends since college," he'd explained, something fond and exasperated in his voice. "Morgan thinks I work too much and need someone to force me to take breaks. Charlotte apparently thinks the same about you." "She's not wrong," I'd admitted. "I've been working double shifts at the library for the past year, saving every penny. The building I want for my bookshop is up for sale, but I'm still about 40,000 short." I'd said it without thinking, the kind of honest admission that would have horrified me under normal circumstances. But something about Weston made my usual filters dissolve. Maybe it was the wine we'd shared. Maybe it was the private room that created an illusion of intimacy. Maybe it was simply that after trudging through a rainstorm to meet a stranger, normal social barriers seemed silly. Now, in the bright light of morning, I cringed at my openness. What had I been thinking? Telling a near stranger about my financial situation, about my dreams that probably seemed quaint and impractical to someone from his world? Charlotte's next text was more specific. Weston texted Morgan. Says you're unexpectedly fascinating. That's Weston speak for smitten. Call me. I stared at the phone, something warm and alarming spreading through my chest. Fascinating? Me? The woman who organized her spice rack alphabetically and had once spent an entire weekend cataloging her personal library using the Dewey Decimal System? Before I could decide whether to call Charlotte or hide from the entire situation, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Good morning, Violet. I hope I'm not calling too early. Weston's voice was unmistakable, that slight accent making my name sound like something exotic. It's 10 o'clock, I said, sitting up abruptly and immediately regretting it as my sore feet protested. I've been awake for hours. A complete lie. I'd been conscious for approximately 7 minutes. Liar, he said, and I could hear amusement in his voice. You're still in bed. I can hear it in your voice. That's very presumptuous, I said, even as I pulled the covers higher, as if he could somehow see through the phone. Is it? Last night you mentioned you're not a morning person, that you usually don't get out of bed before 11 on your days off, that you consider anything before noon to be an ungodly hour. Had I said all that? Apparently the wine had been stronger than I'd thought. You have an unsettling memory for details. Only when the details are interesting, he replied. Speaking of which, there's a package arriving at your address in approximately 10 minutes. Don't be alarmed. It's not anything inappropriate. You're sending me things? I asked, alarm bells ringing despite his reassurance. We went on one date. That seems premature. Consider it an apology for the restaurant not having shoes in your size last night, he said. I noticed yours were beyond repair. I looked at the broken heels sitting sadly by my door, already consigned to the trash. You don't need to apologize for my shoe problems, or buy me new shoes. That's really not necessary. Violet, he said, and something about the way he said it made me stop protesting. Let me do this. Not because I think you can't take care of yourself, not because I'm trying to buy your affection, but because I want to. Because last night was the first time in longer than I can remember that I forgot about work and obligations, and just enjoyed being in someone's company. That's worth more than a pair of shoes. I didn't know what to say to that. In the silence that followed, I heard him sigh softly. I'm making you uncomfortable, he said. That wasn't my intention. If you'd prefer, I didn't contact you again. No, I interrupted, surprising myself with my vehemence. I mean, it's fine. You can send shoes. And call. If you want to. I wouldn't mind that. The understatement of the century. I wouldn't mind if Weston Ashford wanted to keep calling me, keep seeing me, keep looking at me the way he had across the dinner table when I'd been explaining my theory about fictional lighthouse keepers, like I was saying something worth listening to. Good, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Because I'd like to see you again. Tomorrow night, if you're free. Nothing fancy this time. Just dinner at a place Morgan recommended. She says they have the best carbonara in the city. I love carbonara, I said, then immediately felt foolish for admitting it so enthusiastically. I know. You mentioned it last night when you were explaining your theory about comfort food being tied to childhood memories. I really did talk a lot, didn't I? I said, mortification setting in. You really did, he agreed. It was perfect. Say yes to dinner, Violet. Yes, I said, before I could think better of it. Yes to dinner. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. The weather, the book I was currently reading, his sister's unfortunate habit of adopting stray cats. When we finally hung up, I sat in bed for a long moment, staring at my phone and trying to understand what was happening. Weston Ashford was interested in me. Not in some abstract, obligatory way, because our sisters had set us up. Actually interested. Enough to call the morning after. Enough to remember details about lighthouse keepers and carbonara, and my shameful sleep habits. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my thoughts. The package. I threw on a robe and hurried to the door, opening it to find a delivery person holding an elegant box from a boutique I'd walked past countless times but never entered. The kind of place that didn't list prices because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Inside the box were shoes. Not just any shoes, but beautiful, practical leather flats in a deep burgundy that would go with everything I owned. They were soft as butter, clearly handmade, with cushioned insoles that suggested someone had thought about comfort as well as style. There was also a note, written in precise, elegant handwriting. For the next time it rains. These are made by a cobbler in Florence who guarantees they're both waterproof and indestructible. I took the liberty of guessing your size based on the shoes you left at the restaurant last night. If they don't fit, let me know and I'll have them exchanged. W. I held the shoes, feeling the quality of the leather, and something in my chest tightened. This wasn't some generic gift grabbed by an assistant. He'd thought about it, remembered the rain, considered that I might need shoes that could withstand my tendency to walk instead of taking taxis. It was thoughtful in a way that made me want to cry, which was ridiculous because they were just shoes. Except they weren't just shoes. They were proof that last night had been real, that I hadn't imagined the connection or the way he'd looked at me, or the 3 hours that had felt like minutes. They were a promise that tomorrow night would happen, that this wasn't some one-time anomaly, but the beginning of something. I called Charlotte, who answered on the first ring with, "Finally, tell me everything." "He sent me shoes," I said, looking at them like they might disappear if I looked away. "Italian shoes," Charlotte corrected, clearly already briefed by Morgan. "From that place in Florence that makes them custom. Do you have any idea how much those cost?" "I don't want to know," I said, because putting a number on them would make me feel obligated in ways I wasn't ready to process. "Did he ask to see you again?" "Tomorrow night, someplace with good carbonara." Charlotte squealed, the sound piercing enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Vi, this is amazing. Do you know how long it's been since Weston dated anyone? Morgan says he hasn't shown interest in a woman in over 2 years. Not since—" She stopped abruptly. "Not since what?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "Nothing. Just, he had a bad experience. But that's his story to tell, not mine. The point is, you clearly made an impression, a big one." After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day trying not to obsess about the upcoming dinner, while simultaneously obsessing about it. I tried to work on my bookshop business plan, but found myself staring at the shoes instead. I attempted to read, but got through 3 pages before realizing I'd absorbed nothing. Finally, I gave up and did what I always did when my brain refused to cooperate. I went to work. The library was quiet on Sunday afternoons, mostly students cramming for exams and elderly patrons reading newspapers. I was reshelving returns in the literature section when I felt eyes on me. I turned to find a woman watching me from the end of the aisle. She was probably in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested wealth and taste, with sharp eyes that assessed me with unsettling thoroughness. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, offering my professional librarian smile. "You're Violet Reynolds," she said. Not a question. "Yes," I said slowly, unease prickling down my spine. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "Not yet," she said, moving closer with measured steps. "But I know who you are, and I know you had dinner with my nephew last night." The emphasis on my nephew made it clear exactly which nephew she meant. This was a member of the Ashford family, which meant I was being evaluated, assessed for worthiness or threat or whatever criteria wealthy families used when an outsider appeared in their carefully controlled sphere. "It was just dinner," I said, keeping my voice level, even as my heart began to race. "Nothing is ever just anything with Weston," she replied. "He called me this morning, first time he's initiated contact in 6 months, asked about a property that's for sale downtown, an old building that would be perfect for, and I quote, an antiquarian bookshop run by someone who actually cares about books." The room seemed to tilt slightly. He'd asked about the building, the one I'd mentioned wanting, the one I'd admitted I couldn't afford. My mind spun with the implications. "I didn't ask him to do that," I said quickly. "I didn't ask him for anything." "I know," she said, and her expression softened slightly. "That's precisely why he's doing it. Weston doesn't respond well to people who want things from him. He's spent his entire life surrounded by those types, but someone who wants nothing, who's content to simply be herself, without calculation or ulterior motive." She studied me with those sharp eyes. "That's novel. That's dangerous." "Dangerous," I repeated, not liking the word or its implications. "To his equilibrium," she clarified. "To the very careful life he's built. You should know that before you get more involved. My nephew isn't just wealthy, Violet. He's complicated. His life is complicated. And once you're in it, extricating yourself becomes difficult." "We've had one date," I said, though it felt like more than that, like last night had somehow compressed months of getting to know you into 3 hours of honest conversation. "One date during which he apparently decided you were worth investigating," she said. "Worth calling family members about. Worth thinking about instead of focusing on the very important business matters that should have his complete attention." She paused. "I'm not here to warn you off. I'm here to make sure you understand what you're potentially getting into." "And what am I potentially getting into?" I asked, part of me wanting to know, part of me afraid of the answer. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's the thing, dear. I'm not entirely sure myself. My nephew has always been private. Since returning from Italy, he's been even more so. But I do know this. When Weston commits to something, he commits completely. It's both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness." She left after that, disappearing between the stacks as silently as she'd appeared, leaving me standing there with my arms full of books and my mind full of questions. What had she meant about complications? About his life being difficult to escape? And why had Weston asked about the bookshop building? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Morgan, Weston's sister. Charlotte gave me your number. Can we meet for coffee? I promise I'm less intimidating than whatever family member just tracked you down at work. That was Aunt Catherine, wasn't it? She has a bad habit of vetting anyone who gets within 10 feet of Wes. Ignore her. Or at least don't let her scare you off. Please? My brother needs someone like you, M." I stared at the message, then at the literature section where Aunt Catherine had stood, then at my phone again. Less than 24 hours since our first date, and I was already being investigated by family members, receiving mysterious warnings, and somehow caught up in something I didn't fully understand. The smart thing would be to cancel tomorrow's dinner, to thank Weston for the lovely evening and the beautiful shoes, and then politely extract myself from whatever complicated situation his aunt had referenced. I could go back to my safe, predictable life of books and saving money and dreaming about a future that felt manageable because it was entirely under my control. But as I looked down at the burgundy leather flats I'd worn to work, at the evidence of Weston's attention to detail and thoughtfulness, I knew I wasn't going to do the smart thing. I was going to show up for carbonara tomorrow night. I was going to see where this led, complications and all. I texted Morgan back. "Coffee sounds good. Tomorrow morning, before I talk myself out of this entire thing." Her response was immediate. 10 a.m. at Stella's on 5th. And don't worry. Whatever you're imagining, it's probably not as bad as you think. Or maybe it is. But at least the coffee will be good. That night, lying in bed, I pulled up the Ashford family on my phone. There was surprisingly little, given their prominence. Old photographs of charity galas and ribbon-cutting ceremonies, business announcements. But very little about Weston specifically, and nothing at all about what he'd been doing in Italy, or what had brought him back. I was about to give up when I found a single article from 2 years ago. A brief mention in the society pages about the Ashford family welcoming home their prodigal son after an extended stay abroad. But it was the photo that made me pause. Weston standing slightly apart from his family, his expression closed and distant in a way that made him look like a stranger wearing a familiar face. What had happened in those 2 years? What had changed him from the man in earlier photos, smiling easily at cameras, to the guarded, complicated person his aunt had warned me about? And why, despite all the warnings and mysteries and complications, did I find myself counting down the hours until I could see him again? Coffee with Morgan turned out to be less intimidating and more enlightening than I'd expected. She was younger than Weston by about 5 years, with the same storm blue eyes, but a more open, expressive face. Within 10 minutes of sitting down, she'd told me about her 3 rescued cats, her failed attempt at learning Italian to surprise Weston, and her theory that her brother needed someone who wouldn't be impressed by the Ashford name. He spent 2 years in Italy basically being nobody, she said, stirring sugar into her cappuccino. Working with his hands, living in this tiny apartment, learning to rebuild motorcycles from this old man named Marco, who didn't care that Wes came from money. He was happier there than I'd ever seen him. What made him come back? I asked, genuinely curious. Morgan's expression darkened slightly. Family obligation. Dad got sick, and someone needed to take over the family businesses. Our older brother Julian is brilliant at making money, but terrible at the actual management side. Wes is good at both, so... She shrugged, but there was sadness in the gesture. He came home, left everything he'd built in Italy behind. I think part of him resented it, even though he'd never say so. And now he restores motorcycles in his spare time, I said, pieces clicking into place. And works 80-hour weeks and never takes vacations and hasn't dated anyone in 2 years, because most women either want his money or can't handle that he's not just a trust fund kid playing at having a job. Morgan leaned forward. And then he meets you, waterlogged, barefoot, late to your own blind date, and somehow you make him laugh. Actually laugh. Not the polite sound he makes at board meetings. Do you understand how rare that is? I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, absorbing this. Your Aunt Catherine came to see me yesterday, at the library. She seemed concerned. Aunt Catherine is always concerned, Morgan said, rolling her eyes. She's been trying to set Wes up with appropriate matches since he got back. By appropriate, I mean boring socialites who won't challenge him or make him feel anything beyond mild tolerance. The fact that you're not that terrifies her. I'm a librarian who dreams about owning a bookshop, I said. That's not exactly threatening. You're genuine, Morgan corrected. You don't want anything from him except his company. That's revolutionary in his world. Also terrifying because it means he might actually fall for you. And Catherine thinks that would derail his focus on family responsibilities. She paused. She's not wrong, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Weston. Plans for tonight. Small Italian place. Excellent carbonara. No family members interrogating you. Sound good? I smiled despite myself. He texted you, didn't he? Morgan grinned. I may have warned him that Aunt Catherine staged an ambush. He's very protective once he cares about someone. It's actually kind of sweet, even if it can be overwhelming. We've had one date, I reminded her, even as I typed back confirmation for dinner. And he asked about buying you a building, Morgan said gently. Look, I know that's probably freaking you out. It's freaking me out a little. And I'm used to Wes doing impulsive things when he's decided something matters. But here's what you need to know. My brother doesn't do anything halfway. When he commits to something, whether it's a business venture or a relationship or a hobby, he's all in. It's just who he is. That's what your aunt said, that it's both his strength and his weakness. Morgan nodded. It is. It's why he's so good at running the family businesses. He cares about every detail, every person, every decision. But it's also why he got hurt so badly before he left for Italy. He'd been engaged to someone who only saw the Ashford name and the money that came with it. When she cheated on him and he found out, it nearly destroyed him. Not because his heart was broken, but because he'd committed to her completely, and she'd betrayed that. The pieces were starting to form a more complete picture. And then he left. And then he left, Morgan confirmed. Spent 2 years learning to be someone other than Weston Ashford. Came back because family needed him, but I don't think he ever really came all the way back. Part of him is still in that workshop in Florence, I think. At least it was until he met you. I didn't know what to say to that. The weight of Morgan's revelation sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't just a potential girlfriend to Weston. I was somehow connected to his attempts to reclaim something he'd lost, to find a way to be himself while fulfilling obligations he'd never wanted. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone after one date, I said quietly. I know, Morgan said sympathetically. Which is why I'm telling you now, before things get more complicated. You deserve to go into this with open eyes. My brother is wonderful, but he's also intense and complicated and comes with a whole family of people who will have opinions about you. If that's too much, it's okay to say so now. I thought about Weston waiting over an hour in the restaurant, about his jacket around my shoulders and his careful attention to my torn feet, about the shoes that suggested he'd been paying attention to more than just my words, about the way he'd asked about the bookshop building, not as a grand gesture, but as someone genuinely interested in helping me achieve my dreams. I want to see where this goes, I said finally, even if it's complicated. Morgan's smile was brilliant. Good, because between you and me, Wes needs complicated. He's had easy and appropriate his whole life. It's never made him happy. That evening, I dressed more carefully than I had for our first date. The restaurant Weston had chosen was indeed small, tucked into a side street I'd walked past hundreds of times without noticing. Inside, it was intimate and warm, with exposed brick walls and candlelight that made everything glow golden. Weston was already there, standing when I entered. He was dressed casually tonight, dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made his eyes look more blue than gray. His expression when he saw me made something flutter in my chest. No rain this time, he said, pulling out my chair with old-fashioned courtesy. And you're wearing the shoes. They're perfect, I said, extending one foot to show him. And waterproof. I tested them. You tested waterproof shoes? His almost smile appeared. I stood in my shower wearing them for 5 minutes while reading a book about Victorian bookbinding, I admitted. My neighbors probably think I'm insane. I think you're thorough, he said, and the way he said it made it sound like a compliment. We ordered carbonara and wine, and for the first hour, conversation flowed easily. He told me about a vintage Ducati he was restoring, and I told him about a first edition I'd found at an estate sale. We argued good-naturedly about the best translation of Dante, and he taught me a few words in Italian that weren't in any textbook I'd studied. But as the plates were cleared and coffee arrived, something shifted. Weston's expression became more serious, and I knew the easy part of the evening was ending. Morgan told you, he said. Not a question. About Italy and your ex-fiancé, I confirmed. I hope that's okay. She seemed to think I should know. She's probably right, he said, tracing the rim of his coffee cup with one finger. I should have told you myself. I just wasn't sure how to bring it up. Hi, I'm emotionally unavailable because someone I trusted betrayed me. Isn't great first date conversation. Neither is, I walked 2 miles barefoot in the rain because I'm too stubborn to admit defeat, I pointed out. But here we are. That earned me a genuine smile. Here we are. He paused, considering his words carefully. What else did Morgan tell you? That you asked about the bookshop building. His expression became unreadable. Does that bother you? I don't know yet, I said honestly. Part of me is flattered, part of me is worried about what it means, and part of me is terrified of owing anyone anything, especially someone I barely know. You wouldn't owe me anything, he said immediately. That's not how this would work. Then how would it work? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, accepting help from someone I've known for 2 days seems either incredibly foolish or incredibly presumptuous. Weston leaned back in his chair, studying me with those storm blue eyes. What if I told you I had a proposition? One that would benefit both of us with no strings attached? I'd say that sounds too good to be true. Hear me out, he said. The building you want is owned by a family friend who's been trying to sell it for 2 years. It's in a part of downtown that's transitioning but hasn't quite arrived yet. Most potential buyers see risk. I see opportunity, especially if it's turned into something that draws foot traffic. He paused. Like an antiquarian bookshop. I can't afford it, I said flatly. Even if he came down on the price, I'm still short. I know, Weston said. Which is where my proposition comes in. I'll provide the financing for the building and renovation costs. You'll run it as you see fit. After 5 years, assuming the business is profitable, ownership transfers to you completely. No debt, no repayment schedule, just yours. I stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. Why would you do that? Because I need someone I can trust, he said simply. And I think you might be that person. You've known me for 2 days, I repeated. How can you possibly trust me? Weston leaned forward, his expression intense. Because in 2 days, you haven't once asked me for anything. You haven't tried to impress me or position yourself or calculate what you could gain from knowing me. You've just been yourself, honest, sometimes awkwardly so, but genuine. Do you know how rare that is in my world? That doesn't explain why you'd give me a building, I said, my heart racing. I'm not giving you anything, he corrected. I'm making an investment. And more than that, I'm making a request. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé. The words hung in the air between us, so unexpected that for a moment I thought I'd misheard. Your what? My family is pushing me to accept an arranged alliance with the Carreras, another old money family, he said, his voice tight with frustration. It's business dressed up as romance, and I want no part of it. But they won't accept that unless I have a compelling reason to refuse. A serious relationship would be that reason. And you want me to pretend to be in a serious relationship with you? I said slowly, still trying to wrap my mind around this. For 8 months, he said. That's how long until the Carreras finalize their own business dealings with a family in Chicago. After that, the pressure for an alliance will disappear. We'd need to appear together at family functions, some public events. Act like a couple in love. He met my eyes. In exchange, I'll finance your bookshop. No conditions, no repayment. Whether we date for real afterward, or never see each other again once the 8 months are over. This is insane, I said. But even as I said it, my mind was calculating. 8 months of playing a role in exchange for my dream. The bookshop I'd been saving for, planning for, dreaming about since I was 16 years old. No more double shifts at the library. No more watching that building sit empty while I scraped together funds that never seemed to accumulate fast enough. It is insane, Weston agreed, but it's also practical. My family gets off my back about the Carreras. You get your bookshop, and we both get time to figure out if what started between us 2 nights ago is something real or just good first date chemistry. What if it's real? I asked. What happens after 8 months if we actually fall for each other? Something flickered in his eyes. Then we'd deal with that when it happens. But I can't promise you anything beyond the arrangement, Violet. I can't promise that I'm capable of giving you what you deserve. All I can offer is honesty about what I can give right now. I should have said no. Should have stood up, thanked him for the lovely dinners and the thoughtful shoes, and walked out before I got any more tangled in whatever complex situation he'd just proposed. But sitting there across from Weston Ashford, seeing the vulnerability beneath his careful control, I found myself asking a different question. What would the rules be for this arrangement? Relief crossed his face, so fleeting I might have imagined it. We'd need to be convincing in public. My family can spot a fake relationship from miles away, but in private it would be whatever we wanted it to be. I wouldn't expect anything physical unless that's something we both genuinely wanted. Your life remains your own. Your choices remain your own. The only thing I'd ask is that for 8 months, when we're in public together, you let me introduce you as my fiancé. And after, I asked, after 8 months, what happens to us? That depends on what develops between us, he said. Maybe by then we'll be genuinely together. Maybe we'll be friends. Maybe we'll never want to see each other again. But whatever happens, the bookshop is yours. That's the deal. I looked at him across the candlelit table. At this complicated man who restored motorcycles and asked about bookshops and had somehow gone from stranger to something more in the span of 2 extraordinary evenings. Every logical part of my brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But another part, the part that had walked 2 miles in the rain rather than give up, was whispering that maybe terrible ideas sometimes led to extraordinary outcomes. I need time to think, I said finally. Take all the time you need, Weston replied. But Violet? Whatever you decide, I meant what I said. You've reminded me what it feels like to be myself, instead of just the person everyone expects me to be. That's worth more than any building or business arrangement. As he walked me to my apartment later, his hand warm and steady at the small of my back, I realized that somewhere between the broken shoe and the carbonara, between the warnings and the revelations, I'd already made my decision. I was going to say yes. To the arrangement. To the complications. To whatever came next. Because 24 years of being safe and practical had never once made me feel the way I felt standing next to Weston Ashford. Like maybe, just maybe, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 3 days after Weston's proposition, I stood in front of the building that would become my bookshop, keys heavy in my hand, and disbelief still swirling in my chest. The morning after our dinner, I'd called him and said, yes. Within 48 hours, papers had been signed, contracts had been drawn up, and what had seemed like an impossible dream was suddenly, terrifyingly real. You're overthinking, Charlotte said beside me, reading my expression with the accuracy of someone who'd known me since childhood. I can literally see your brain spiraling. I agreed to fake date a man I've known for less than a week in exchange for my dream bookshop, I said, staring at the worn brick facade. Overthinking seems appropriate. You agreed to give a relationship a real chance while helping him avoid a business arrangement disguised as marriage, Charlotte corrected. And he's helping you achieve something you've wanted since you were 16. That's not insane. That's opportunistic. It's definitely something, I muttered, but I couldn't stop the smile that crept across my face as I looked at the building. It was perfect. 3 stories of late Victorian architecture, with original crown molding and hardwood floors that creaked with history. The ground floor would be the shop itself. The second floor could be a reading room and rare books collection, and the third floor had a small apartment that I could renovate into living quarters. My phone buzzed. Weston. How does it feel to be a property owner? Well, almost. Papers are filing. Morgan wants to know if you need help with renovation plans. She's apparently secretly always wanted to design a bookshop. Who knew? I smiled at the message, typing back, "Tell her I'd love her help." And it feels surreal. Like I might wake up tomorrow and discover this was an elaborate dream involving expensive shoes and fake engagements. His response came quickly. "If it helps, I'm still processing that I met someone who walked through a rainstorm to meet me and then agreed to one of the most unconventional arrangements I've ever proposed. So we're both living in surreal territory." "What are you grinning about?" Charlotte asked, peering over my shoulder at my phone. "Oh, he's actually charming when he's texting. Good to know the whole intense billionaire thing doesn't translate to awkward emoji usage." "He's not a billionaire," I said automatically, though I had no idea what Weston's actual net worth was, and no desire to know. "Fine. Intense multimillionaire with excellent taste in footwear," Charlotte amended. "My point stands. He's charming, you're charming, and Morgan says he hasn't stopped talking about you since your first date. Which for Weston apparently translates to mentioning you more than once in conversation, which is the equivalent of normal people writing sonnets." I unlocked the building's front door, and we stepped into dust-filled air and possibility. The space was larger than I'd imagined, with exposed brick walls and tall windows that would flood the room with natural light once they were cleaned. I could already see it. Dark wood shelves lining the walls, comfortable reading chairs tucked into corners, the smell of old paper and leather bindings replacing the current mustiness. "This is going to be incredible," Charlotte breathed, walking through the space with the same reverent wonder I felt. "Vi, you're going to have an actual bookshop. Your bookshop." "In 8 months, assuming the arrangement works," I said, the practical part of my brain refusing to be silenced, "and assuming Weston's family doesn't see through us and realize this is all fake." "Is it fake, though?" Charlotte asked, turning to face me. "You like him. Don't pretend you don't. And Morgan says he's completely smitten with you, which is Weston speak for falling hard." "We barely know each other," I protested, but the words felt hollow even to my own ears. "You knew him well enough to agree to this," Charlotte pointed out, "and well enough to trust that he won't pull the building out from under you if things don't work out romantically. That's either incredibly naive or incredibly perceptive. Given that you're one of the most cautious people I know, I'm betting on perceptive." Before I could respond, the bell above the door chimed. We both turned to find Weston standing in the doorway, looking somehow both perfectly put together and slightly rumpled. He wore dark jeans and a leather jacket that made him look less like a businessman and more like the motorcycle enthusiast Morgan had described. "You weren't answering your phone," he said to me, though his eyes were taking in the space with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," I said, suddenly hyper-aware of Charlotte's presence and her knowing smile. "Just processing." "Understandable," he said, moving further into the space. "This is a lot to take in." He looked around, and I saw something shift in his expression. Approval mixed with something softer. "It's perfect for you. I can already see it." "You can?" I asked, surprised that he'd understand my vision without explanation. "Literature section along the back wall," he said, gesturing. "Rare books upstairs in a climate-controlled environment. Comfortable seating by the windows for browsers. A small section for book restoration, maybe tucked into that alcove." He turned to look at me. "Am I close?" "Terrifyingly close," I admitted. "How did you know?" "Because I've been listening," he said simply. "To what you want, what you dream about, what matters to you." He paused, seeming suddenly uncertain. "I hope I'm not overstepping. Morgan offered to help with renovation planning, but if you'd rather do it yourself." "I'd love Morgan's help," I interrupted, meaning it. "And yours, if you have time between running family businesses and your secret motorcycle restoration habit." Charlotte cleared her throat pointedly. I'm going to take measurements for insurance purposes, she announced, pulling a tape measure from her purse with the efficiency of someone who'd planned this exit in advance. You two discuss. Renovation plans. Or whatever. She disappeared toward the back of the building, leaving Weston and me alone in the dusty space. I brought something, Weston said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. For the arrangement, you'll need to wear it to family functions, and it should look convincing. He opened the box to reveal a ring that stole my breath. Not because it was enormous or flashy. It wasn't. But because it was perfect. An emerald-cut sapphire in an antique platinum setting, flanked by small diamonds that caught the light streaming through the dirty windows. It was exactly what I would have chosen for myself if I'd ever let myself dream about engagement rings. It was my grandmother's, Weston said, his voice soft. She left it to me before she died, said I should give it to someone who loved books and old things and wasn't impressed by money. I didn't think that person existed until I met you. Weston, I breathed, unable to form a more complete sentence. It's just for the arrangement, he said quickly, though something in his eyes suggested that wasn't entirely true. But I thought I wanted it to be something you'd actually want to wear, something that felt right. I held out my left hand, and he slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, the weight of it foreign but not uncomfortable. Looking down at it, I felt the reality of what we were doing crash over me again. This wasn't just an arrangement anymore. This was a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, given to me with an understanding that felt impossibly intimate for two people who'd known each other less than a week. What if I can't do this? I asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been circling since I'd said yes. What if I'm terrible at pretending to be your fiancé? Then don't pretend, Weston said, moving closer. Just be yourself. That's all I want, Violet. Not some performance of who you think I need you to be. Just you, honest and awkward and brilliant exactly as you are. That's a lot of pressure to put on honesty, I said. But I was smiling despite the tears that threatened at the corners of my eyes. I know, he said, reaching out to brush his thumb along my jawline, in a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. But if we're going to do this, really do this, we need to start from a place of truth, even if the circumstances are unconventional. Unconventional is definitely one word for it, I said, looking down at the ring again. Your family is going to have questions about how we met, how long we've known each other, why we're moving so fast. Let them ask, Weston said. We'll tell them the truth, that our sisters set us up, that I waited for you while you walked through a rainstorm, that I've never met anyone who made me feel the way you do. All of that is real, Violet. The timeline might be compressed, but the feelings aren't fabricated. Aren't they? I asked, needing to hear him say it clearly. No, he said firmly. Whatever this is between us, it's real. The arrangement just gives us a framework to explore it without the pressure of either of our families interfering. 8 months to figure out if what we have is sustainable, if it's something we both want to build on. And if it's not? I asked. If at the end of 8 months we realize this was just chemistry and good timing? Then we part as friends, and you have your bookshop, he said. But Violet, I don't think that's how this ends. Before I could ask what he meant, Charlotte reappeared from the back room. Sorry to interrupt what looks like a very romantic moment, but there's a massive water stain on the ceiling upstairs that you two should probably discuss. And also, Vi, you're wearing a ring that's definitely worth more than my car, so I'm assuming the fake engagement is now official? I looked down at the sapphire on my finger, then up at Weston, who was watching me with an expression that made my heart stutter. I guess it is. Good, Charlotte said, because Morgan is outside with approximately 7,000 paint samples and a contractor who apparently owes the Ashford family a favor. She texted me 10 minutes ago asking if it was safe to come in or if she'd be interrupting. "She can come in," I said, still looking at Weston. "We're done. Negotiating." Charlotte grinned and headed back outside, pulling out her phone to text Morgan. When we were alone again, Weston took my hand, his thumb brushing over the ring he'd just placed there. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saying yes to this, for taking a chance on something unconventional, for being willing to help me avoid a future I didn't want while pursuing one you do." "Thank you for waiting," I replied, "for not leaving the restaurant that night, for seeing something in me worth all of this." "Violet," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I saw you stumbling down the street in broken shoes, cursing at the rain, and I knew. I can't explain it, but I knew that you were going to change everything." The door burst open before I could respond, Morgan sweeping in with an armload of paint samples and a smile that rivaled the sun. "Okay, future sister-in-law, we have decisions to make. Charlotte told me you're thinking deep green for the main room, but I brought some alternatives in case you want to consider." She stopped abruptly, her gaze zeroing in on my hand. "Oh my God, he gave you Grandma Elena's ring." "Is that okay?" I asked, suddenly worried that I'd crossed some family boundary I didn't understand. "Okay? It's perfect," Morgan said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "She would have loved you, probably would have locked you two in a room together until you figured out you were meant for each other." She paused, looking between Weston and me. "Not that you needed much help with that." "We barely know each other," I protested weakly, though the argument was getting harder to believe every time I said it. "You know the important things," Morgan countered. "That's what matters. Now come on, we have a bookshop to design, and I have 17,000 ideas that we need to narrow down to something actually buildable." As Morgan spread paint samples across the dusty floor and Charlotte pulled up architectural plans on her phone, I caught Weston watching me with an expression that made something warm unfurl in my chest. Whatever complicated thing we'd started, whatever unconventional arrangement we'd made, it was beginning to feel less like a business deal and more like something that might actually last beyond 8 months. The ring on my finger caught the light, sapphire and diamonds glinting like a promise. Not of forever, not yet, but of possibility, of patience, of two people choosing to take a chance on something neither of them fully understood, but both of them wanted to explore. I was Violet Reynolds, small-town librarian with big dreams and a tendency to say awkward things at the worst moments. And somehow, improbably, I was also the fiancé of Weston Ashford, complicated and intense and surprisingly gentle when he thought no one was watching. 8 months suddenly felt both impossibly long and not nearly long enough to figure out where this was all heading. But as I stood in my almost bookshop, surrounded by people who already felt like family, I realized that maybe that was the point. Some things couldn't be planned or controlled or made to fit into neat timelines. Some things just had to be lived, moment by unexpected moment, until you looked back and realized that the story you'd been telling yourself about your life had transformed into something entirely new. And I was ready for that transformation, terrifying as it was. I was ready for all of it. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of paint samples, renovation meetings, and increasingly frequent couple appearances that started to feel less like performance and more like routine. Weston picked me up from the library every evening, always with coffee in hand, because he'd noticed I never remembered to eat lunch. We had dinner with Morgan twice, with Charlotte and her husband once, and attended a Ashford family charity event where I met more relatives than I could possibly remember. Everyone seemed to accept our engagement without question, though I caught Aunt Catherine watching us with sharp eyes at the charity gala. But even she'd softened slightly when Weston had described my plans for the bookshop, with genuine enthusiasm, his hand never leaving the small of my back as we'd made the rounds through his family's social circle. "You're good at this," I'd whispered to him during a quiet moment between conversations. "At what?" he'd asked, accepting champagne flutes from a passing waiter and handing me one. "Making it feel real," I'd said, taking a sip to avoid his gaze. "The way you talk about me, about us, it's very convincing." "Violet," he'd said, waiting until I looked at him. "I'm not acting. That's the part you keep missing." Before I could respond, we'd been pulled into another conversation, another round of congratulations and questions about wedding plans we hadn't made because the wedding would never happen, or so I kept telling myself, even as the lie felt less convincing every time Weston looked at me like I was something precious. The bookshop renovation was progressing faster than I'd expected. Morgan had connections to contractors who moved with impressive efficiency, and within 2 weeks, the worst of the structural issues had been addressed. The water damage upstairs was repaired, new electrical wiring was being installed, and the hardwood floors had been refinished to bring back their original warm honey glow. I spent every free moment at the building, watching it transform from dusty potential into something real. Weston often joined me, showing up in worn jeans and t-shirts instead of his usual suits, ready to help paint or move heavy furniture or debate the merits of different shelving configurations. It was during these times that I saw glimpses of the man Morgan had described, the one who'd spent 2 years in Italy working with his hands, finding peace in physical labor instead of boardroom decisions. "You're happier here," I observed one evening as we painted the main room's accent wall a deep forest green. "Than in your office." "I'm happier with you," he corrected, not looking up from the careful brushstrokes he was applying. "The location is secondary." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. We worked in companionable silence for another hour, until my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Violet Reynolds?" a woman's voice asked. Professional, but with an edge of urgency. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Detective Sarah Chen. I'm with the Ashford City Police Department. I'd like to speak with you about Weston Ashford if you have a moment." My stomach dropped. "Is he okay? Did something happen?" "He's fine," Detective Chen assured me quickly. "But there are some things you should know about the man you're engaged to. Things his family might not have told you." I looked over at Weston, who was still focused on painting, humming something under his breath that sounded like Italian. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone," Chen said. "Can you meet me tomorrow? Coffee shop on 5th Street, 10 a.m. It's important, Ms. Reynolds. There are aspects of the Ashford family business that go beyond legitimate enterprises. If you're going to marry into that family, you deserve to know what you're getting into." After we hung up, I stood frozen, paint roller in hand, mind racing. What hadn't Weston told me? What secrets did his family keep behind their philanthropic facade? "Violet." Weston's voice brought me back. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired. I should probably head home soon." Something shifted in his expression. Concern, maybe, or suspicion. "Did something happen? You were fine 2 minutes ago." "Just a headache," I said, which wasn't entirely false. My head was starting to pound with the weight of Detective Chen's implications. "Rain check on finishing the accent wall?" "Of course," he said, but his eyes remained concerned as he cleaned his brushes and walked me to my car. "Violet, if something's wrong—" "It's nothing," I interrupted. "Just tired from the long week. I'll see you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he agreed, but the worry didn't leave his face as he watched me drive away. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, anxiety churning in my stomach. Detective Chen was already there, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an expression that suggested she'd seen too much to be easily shocked. "Ms. Reynolds," she greeted me, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Thank you for meeting me." "You said there are things I should know about Weston," I said, skipping pleasantries. What things? Chen pulled a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. The Ashford family has been under investigation for the past 18 months. Nothing we can prove yet, but there are patterns. Money moving through shell corporations. Businesses that operate at a loss, but somehow stay open. Connections to individuals with known ties to organized crime. My hands were cold as I opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos, financial documents with highlighters marking suspicious transactions, and reports detailing the Ashford family's various business holdings. But it was the photographs that made my breath catch. Weston, clearly photographed without his knowledge, meeting with men whose faces had been annotated with names and criminal records. These photos, I managed. When were they taken? Various times over the past year, Chen said, after he returned from Italy. Ms. Reynolds, I want to be clear. We have no evidence that Weston Ashford himself has committed any crimes. But his family's businesses, the people they associate with, the way money flows through their organizations. There are questions, and you're about to legally tie yourself to all of that. Why are you telling me this? I asked, looking up from the photographs. If you're investigating his family, why tip me off? Chen's expression softened, because I've seen what happens to people who marry into families like this without understanding what they're getting into. The best case scenario, you spend your life looking over your shoulder. Worst case. She didn't finish the thought. You think I'm in danger, I said flatly. I think you might be naive, Chen replied gently. Weston Ashford is, by all accounts, a good man. But good men from complicated families sometimes have to make complicated choices. And sometimes the people they care about get caught in the crossfire. I closed the folder, my mind spinning. What do you want from me? Information, Chen said. If you see or hear anything that might help our investigation, I'd like you to contact me. You wouldn't be working for us officially, just keeping your eyes open, making sure that if there is illegal activity happening, we can address it before anyone gets hurt. You want me to spy on my fiancé? I said, the word bitter on my tongue. I want you to protect yourself, Chen corrected. And if Weston is as good as everyone says, then helping us clear his name should be in everyone's best interest. She left her card on the table when she departed, and I sat staring at it for a long time. Protect yourself. But from what? Weston had been nothing but honest with me. Nothing but kind. He'd given me my dream bookshop, asked only that I help him avoid an arranged marriage, and shown me more consideration in 3 weeks than most men managed in 3 months. But the photographs didn't lie. Whatever his family was involved in, it was serious enough to warrant police surveillance, and I was about to be legally connected to all of it. My phone buzzed. Weston. Lunch today? Want to show you the new shelving that arrived this morning. I stared at the message, then at Detective Chen's card, then back at the message, making a decision that would either be the smartest or stupidest thing I'd ever done. I texted back. Yes to lunch. Need to talk to you about something. 2 hours later, I stood in the bookshop watching Weston carefully position shelves against the exposed brick wall. He'd dressed down again today, and there was paint in his hair from yesterday that he'd apparently never noticed. He looked happy, relaxed in a way I'd never seen him at fancy dinners or family events. What did you want to talk about? He asked, stepping back to examine the shelf placement. I pulled Detective Chen's card from my pocket and handed it to him. I met with a police detective this morning. She seems to think your family is involved in something illegal. She wanted me to gather information about you. Weston went very still, his entire body tensing in a way that made him suddenly look dangerous instead of domestic. What did you tell her? That I'd think about it, I said honestly, and then I decided to tell you instead. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he set down the shelf he'd been holding and gestured to the paint-splattered chairs we'd been using as makeshift furniture. "Sit down. You deserve the truth." My heart was racing as I sat, watching him struggle to find words. "My family's business is mostly legitimate," he began. "The real estate holdings, the restaurants, the charitable foundation, all of that is real and above board. But there are other elements, connections my grandfather made during Prohibition that never quite dissolved, favors owed and collected that exist in legal gray areas." He met my eyes. "I came back from Italy specifically to clean that up, to transition everything into legitimate operations before the next generation inherits." "And the people in the photographs?" I asked. "The ones with criminal records? Some are criminals trying to go straight, looking for legitimate business opportunities," he said. "Some are old connections I'm trying to sever without causing complications. And some are probably exactly what they look like. Bad people my family should have cut ties with years ago." "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" I asked, hurt creeping into my voice. "Because I wanted you to see me," he said simply. "Not my family's history, not the complications, just me. The man who restores motorcycles and helps you paint bookshops and waits in restaurants for waterlogged women with broken shoes." He moved to kneel in front of my chair, taking my hands in his. "But you're right to know. If we're going to do this, really do this, you need to understand what you're getting into." "And what am I getting into?" I asked quietly. "A family trying to become something better than what it was," he said. "A man who's falling for you so fast it terrifies him, and possibly some danger, if I can't complete the transition away from the old ways before someone decides I'm a threat to their interests." "That's a lot," I managed, my voice shaky. "I know," he said. "And if it's too much, I understand. I'll still honor our agreement about the bookshop, but I won't ask you to risk your safety for an arrangement that was always meant to be temporary." I looked down at our joined hands, at the ring on my finger that had belonged to his grandmother, at this complicated man who'd somehow become the center of my world in just 3 weeks. "What if I don't want it to be temporary?" His breath caught. "Violet." "I told Detective Chen no," I interrupted. "Before I came here, I called her and said I wouldn't spy on you. Because whatever complicated things your family is involved in, I've seen who you are. And I want to see where this goes, even if it's messy and complicated and possibly dangerous." Weston pulled me from the chair into his arms, holding me with a desperation that spoke of how much my answer mattered. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish," he murmured against my hair. "Probably both," I admitted. "But I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his storm blue eyes intense with emotion. "Then I'm choosing you too. Not as an arrangement, not as a convenience, as a real relationship with all the complications and possibilities that come with it." "Even though we barely know each other?" I asked. "We know the important things," he said, echoing Morgan's words from weeks ago. "The rest is just details we'll figure out as we go." He kissed me then, and it wasn't the chaste kiss we'd shared for appearances at family functions. This was real and deep and full of all the things we hadn't said, but both felt. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, I rested my forehead against his. "I'm still scared," I admitted. "Good," he said. "So am I. It means we're paying attention." We spent the rest of the day working on the bookshop, but something had shifted between us. The touches were more frequent, more genuine. The conversations went deeper. And when he drove me home that evening, he walked me to my door and kissed me goodnight, like it mattered. Like I mattered. Like this thing between us was no longer an arrangement, but something that could break both our hearts if we weren't careful. "Be safe," he said, pulling away reluctantly. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," I confirmed. "Always tomorrow." As I watched him drive away, I touched the ring on my finger and wondered what I'd just committed myself to. But beneath the fear was something else. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of love. Whatever complicated future we were building, it was ours to shape, and I was ready to see what we could create together. The call came at 2 a.m, 3 months into what was supposed to be an 8-month arrangement, but had evolved into something real and terrifying, and more precious than I could have imagined. Weston's name on my phone screen sent my heart racing before I'd even answered. "Get out of your apartment," he said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Now, Violet. Don't pack. Don't think. Just get to your car and drive to Morgan's. I'm sending security to meet you there." I was already moving, grabbing my keys and phone, pulling a jacket over my sleep shirt. "What's happening?" "Someone tried to kill me tonight," he said, and my blood turned to ice. "They failed, but they know about you. About us. I need you somewhere safe until I can figure out who and why." "Are you okay?" My voice was shaking as I ran down the stairs of my building, car keys clutched in my suddenly numb fingers. "I'm fine. Few scrapes, nothing serious." "Violet, promise me you'll go straight to Morgan's. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone. Just drive." "I promise," I said, already in my car, locking the doors and starting the engine with trembling hands. The drive to Morgan's took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Weston stayed on the phone the entire time, his voice the only thing keeping my panic at bay. By the time I pulled into her driveway, there were 2 black SUVs already there, and Morgan was standing in her doorway with her arms wrapped around herself despite the jacket she wore. "She's here," Weston said into the phone, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Morgan pulled me inside immediately, her usual cheerfulness replaced by grim efficiency. "You're okay. You're safe. Wes has people watching the house. No one's getting near you." "What happened?" I asked, sinking onto her couch as delayed shock began setting in. "He said someone tried to kill him." "His cousin Julian," Morgan said, her voice tight with anger. "Wes has been transitioning the family businesses into legitimate operations. Julian's been losing money from investments that weren't exactly legal, and apparently he decided the solution was to remove Wes from the equation before the old revenue streams dried up completely." My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. "He tried to kill his own cousin over money?" "Over power," Morgan corrected. "Julian's always resented that Wes came back from Italy and took over as head of the family. This was his play to take control." She sat beside me, taking one of my hands. "But he failed. Wes is fine, and Julian is currently being dealt with by people who handle these kinds of family problems." I didn't want to know what that meant. Didn't want to understand the implications of family problems that involved assassination attempts and security details. But as I sat there in Morgan's living room, I realized I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I wasn't just dating Weston anymore. I was part of his world, with all its complications and dangers. The door burst open, and Weston swept in, still dressed in torn clothes with blood on his shirt that made my heart stop before I realized it wasn't his. He had a cut above his eye and bruises forming on his jaw. But he was alive and whole and crossing the room to pull me into his arms with a desperation that took my breath away. "You're okay," he breathed against my hair. "Thank God you're okay." "I'm fine," I said, pulling back to examine his injuries. "You're the one who was almost killed." "I heal," he said dismissively. "Violet, I'm so sorry. I never should have let you get this close. Should have known that Julian would see you as leverage or a threat. This is my fault." "Stop," I said firmly. "This is Julian's fault, not yours." "You could have been hurt," he insisted, cupping my face in his hands. "You could have been targeted because of me, because of what we are to each other." "And what are we?" I asked quietly. because I think it's time we stop pretending this is just an arrangement." Something intense and vulnerable crossed his face. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since that first night when you stumbled down the street cursing at the rain. I love your honesty and your dreams and the way you organize books by color when you're stressed. I love that you chose me even after learning about my family's complications. I love you, Violet, and that's why you need to leave." "What?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Julian won't be the only one who sees you as an opportunity or a weakness," Weston said, his voice rough with emotion. "As long as you're with me, you're a target, so I'm releasing you from our arrangement. The bookshop is yours, free and clear. I'll make sure you have security for a while, just until we're certain no one else is planning anything. But we can't keep doing this. I can't keep putting you at risk." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You're breaking up with me to keep me safe." "I'm letting you go before someone hurts you to get to me," he corrected. "No," I said flatly. He blinked. "No?" "No," I repeated. "You don't get to make this decision for me, Weston. You don't get to decide what risks I'm willing to take or what future I want to build." I stood up, forcing him to step back so I could meet his eyes properly. "I chose you knowing your family was complicated. I chose you after talking to police detectives about investigations. I chose you understanding that this world you live in comes with dangers I can't fully comprehend. And I'm choosing you now, after your cousin tried to kill you and put me at risk in the process." "Violet." "I love you," I interrupted. "I love you and your complicated family and your motorcycle restoration hobby and the way you remember every detail about my dreams. I love the way you waited for me that first night and the way you've shown up for me every day since. So no, I'm not leaving. Not unless you tell me you don't want me anymore." "I'll always want you," he said, his voice breaking. "That's the problem." "That's not a problem," I said. "That's the solution. We face whatever comes next together. Not with me hidden away somewhere safe while you deal with family drama alone. Together, Weston. Or not at all." He pulled me against him, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," he murmured. "Or the most foolish." "Both," I said, repeating my words from months ago. "Definitely both." Morgan cleared her throat from where she'd been tactfully examining her houseplants. "So since Vi's clearly not going anywhere, maybe we should talk about actual security measures. And also about the fact that Mom is going to have opinions about all of this when she finds out Julian tried to stage a coup." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of family meetings, security briefings, and what Morgan cheerfully called cleaning house. Julian was sent somewhere distant and carefully monitored. I didn't ask for details, and Weston didn't volunteer them. Other family members who'd been involved in the old illegal operations were given choices: transition to legitimate work or find employment elsewhere, far from the Ashford influence. Through it all, Weston held my hand. At family meetings where I met aunts and uncles and cousins I hadn't known existed. At the bookshop, which was now weeks away from opening. In his office, where I sometimes worked on my own projects, while he handled the complicated business of rebuilding his family's empire into something he could be proud of. But it was during one of these quiet moments, surrounded by his financial reports and my collection of book catalogs, that everything changed again. "I need to tell you something," I said, setting down the antiquarian dealer's catalog I'd been reviewing. "And I'm not sure how you're going to react." Weston looked up from his laptop, concern immediately crossing his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said quickly. "At least I don't think it is. But remember that charity gala we attended 2 months ago? The one where everyone kept joking about how I only drank sparkling water?" His expression shifted from concern to something else. "Violet, are you pregnant?" I confirmed. my hand moving unconsciously to my stomach. About 7 weeks. I found out yesterday, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you, because this isn't part of our arrangement, and we've only been actually together for 3 months, and your family is in the middle of this massive transition and— He was across the room before I could finish, pulling me into a kiss that was somehow gentle and desperate at the same time. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "A baby," he breathed. "We're having a baby. I know it's terrible timing," I started, but he silenced me with another kiss. "It's perfect timing," he corrected. "A new beginning for all of us. A family built on choice instead of obligation." Over the following months, everything shifted again. The bookshop opened to surprising success, with a literary community embracing what I'd built. Weston officially handed over the family business operations to Morgan and his younger brother, stepping back to focus on his restoration workshop and the family we were building. And 1 year to the day, after I'd missed my bus and walked through a rainstorm to meet a stranger, I stood in a small church, surrounded by family and friends, exchanging vows that were no longer part of an arrangement, but a promise of forever. "I waited for you," Weston said during his vows, his hand covering mine and the barely visible bump of our daughter growing between us. "That first night, and every night since. And I'll keep waiting for you, through every challenge and complication and unexpected joy that comes our way." "I chose you," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "When you were a stranger in a restaurant, when your family was complicated, when your cousin tried to tear us apart. I chose you then, and I'm choosing you now, and I'll choose you every day for the rest of our lives." Charlotte was crying openly in the front row. Morgan was grinning despite her own tears. And Aunt Catherine, who'd initially thought I was completely wrong for Weston, blew her nose loudly into a handkerchief and murmured something about lighthouse keepers that made Morgan dissolve into laughter. 3 months later, our daughter Eleanor arrived, named after the grandmother whose ring I still wore, whose love story with her husband had inspired Weston to believe that sometimes the best relationships started in the most unexpected ways. And 5 years after that, when Eleanor asked how Mommy and Daddy had met, Weston told her the truth, that Mommy had missed her bus and walked through a rainstorm with a broken shoe, and Daddy had waited because sometimes the best things in life were worth waiting for. "Even when they show up late and soaking wet?" Eleanor asked, giggling. "Especially then," I said, catching Weston's eye across our bookshop's reading room, where he was helping a customer find a first edition of their favorite novel. "The best love stories never follow the plan." Because ours certainly hadn't. What started as an arrangement born of convenience had transformed into something real and lasting and more precious than any plan could have predicted. We'd built a life together, not perfect, not without its complications, but entirely our own. And every day, as I organized books in the shop we'd created together, as Weston taught Eleanor about motorcycle engines in his workshop, as we tucked our daughter into bed and found moments of quiet connection in the chaos of family life, I thought about that rainy night when everything changed. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that terrify you. Sometimes love finds you when you're least prepared for it, dripping wet and carrying broken shoes and cursing at the universe. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, someone waits for you in the rain. Not because they have to, but because they've already decided you're worth every complicated, beautiful, unexpected moment that follows.